Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
9, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Hi, Tatiana.
Hello.
Did you get my message, my response to your email?
Yeah, I actually just looked at it like a couple minutes ago. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that was pretty helpful. I think that's
Oh,
gonna
good.
help.
Good. I didn't really cover parallel storylines in class because I want to keep it simple. But I think that might be the way to handle your problem, which is really not a problem. It's a deliberate structure in many cases. I don't know if you've seen the Lord of the Rings films, but that's definitely a classic example of at least two parallel storylines. So you got Frodo and Sam, and then you got the other three guys, and we go back and forth between their storylines the whole time, and it keeps you kind of from getting bogged down in one storyline for too long before you switch it up.
Right. Yeah, that's I'll definitely take a look at those pages in the story structure architect and see if I can figure my way through it.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll get going then, because it looks like we're probably gonna have about everybody that's coming is already here. So let me share my screen. Whoops, no, stop. And get moving here. Okay, good. Okay, so we left off cell 20 something. I think we got through Llewellyn Moss, and we talked about the character dossier. So did I touch on the 7 story archetypes by Young and Campbell?
Yeah, you talked to us about that a little bit.
Okay. There's not much to say. I mean, the graphic is pretty self-explanatory. But for a long time, this was the accepted 7 story paradigms.
I think the last one we left off on, yeah, it was this. This was where we left off.
Okay. Oh, it's cell 29, right? So this is the 36 dramatic situations, and I spoke to you about the difference between this, which is the George Pulte theory, and the story structure architect, right? About the male and female distinctions between story structures and dramatic situations.
I think so.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Do I need to rehash any of that, or did that make sense? I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. It's essentially what I said, is that the Pulte theory, which was sort of piggybacking on top of what Carlo Rossi did, was to try and figure out if there were more than 36 situations. But what they were doing, unfortunately, was applying the same dramatic situations to both men and women in terms of characters. And so what Victoria Schmidt has sort of touched on is the notion that a female dramatic situation could have different and far-reaching implications than it would if she was the same character in a male structured dramatic situation. So that's why I think that book is pretty significant. And then, of course, also because it really helps you analyze the arc of your stories and gives you a sense graphically of what your plot is doing, you know. In terms of the character dossier, pages 2 and 3, this is week 3B, I think, where we start really talking about protagonist and antagonist in terms of our character arcs now. And what we're doing with this document is just fleshing out what what our characters mean to the story, maybe a little bit of their backstory and subtext for their actions or their attitudes. We give a little bit of a physical indication of who these people are. Anything that you can come up with in terms of developing this character outside of the storyline that might somehow direct their exhibition in some way. If we look at the, this is also from Joseph Campbell, and this is using Jungian character archetypes to sort of create all of these archetypal individuals here, which is an interesting diagram because it gives you a strong sense of, how characters are going to be reflected in the story, regardless of their particular details. They're going to demonstrate, chances are 99 out of 100% of the time, I think they're going to demonstrate at least strongly one of these tendencies. And there's a dozen of them here. So you've got the ruling type, the creative type, the innocent, the wise man or the sage, the explorer, the outlaw, the magician, the hero, the lover, the jester, the everyman, which is a pretty broad category, and the caregiver. And then inside this, they're suggesting some subcategories of what the motivations of those types of characters might be. So the caregiver is dedicated to service to others. The ruler is interested in control or power. The creator is the innovator. The outward expression of the internal passion is the creator. The innocent. The sage is looking for understanding or is trying to help someone understand a situation. Of course, the explorer is interested in their personal freedom, but also in their ability to work outside of their sphere of influence or outside of their safety zone. Somebody who might be daring or willing to take risks, even though they're not specifically looking for something like an undiscovered land, they could still fall under the explorer archetype because they demonstrate or exhibit tendencies that where that character is willing to step outside of their safety zone or step outside of their sphere of influence in order to gain more information or to advance their goal. And so these are the archetypes that were reflected in your reading. And it's just a good idea to be familiar with these so you can kind of understand where a character might be coming from. So if you've got a character in your story that you want to be sort of the comic relief or somebody who never takes a situation seriously, who might present an external problem and that they, because of their inability to commit to a goal or an objective, in lieu of relieving themselves of anxiety or tension by taking a cavalier approach to a problem, that really is describing the jester. And in a very, simplified way, it's describing that character as the jester. And that character is, they're calling it enjoyment here, but I'm going to suggest that it could also be, a character who doesn't want to commit, who doesn't want to take a situation seriously enough to be proactive or to do something about a situation that might present itself externally as a problem, or a character's inability to face their own internal struggle could also, I think, fall under the category of a jester, right? And then we have these primary subcategories: connecting with others, providing structure to the world, yearning for the proverbial paradise, or leaving a mark on society. Okay, so we have all of these sort of tendencies that we can start to ferret out when we're fleshing out a character, who they represent in the story, how they interact with other characters in the story. Like some of these characters or some of these archetypes may be compatible or incompatible. And usually when they say things like opposites attract, right? So you might have a conflict where you have one person looking for control and the other person who demonstrates power. And the two of these are cross purposes from one another because they're opposite on the wheel as well, right? The sage versus the jester. We got the person who can't take it seriously and the person who's always looking for meaning under the surface, right? And there are cross purposes from one another. And concurrently speaking, the sage and the ruler may or may not be a good mix. Again, I keep referring back to the Lord of the Rings, but think of the king of the Rohirrim and Wormtongue. So you had the sage who was whose orientation was evil, and the ruler whose orientation was ultimately neutral or good, because he was really concerned with the safety of his people, and the sage was really acting as a conduit for misdirection or misinformation, working on behalf of a greater evil power. And they're adjacent to one another on the chart. Okay, so where they should be compatible, it was an interesting twist where the sage is now the expediter of evil intent, as opposed to being helpful to the ruler to maintaining control. He's committed to the ruler losing control, which is an interesting way of turning that relationship on its head. So if you're just aware of the archetypes and what they can do for you in terms of shaping your characters, and usually this is going to be done before you start fleshing out a screenplay, right? So this would be part of your sort of pre-production homework that you would do when you're trying to figure out, well, what would a character say in this situation, or what would they do? Well, what kind of character are they? If you can really sort of nail down what their literary tendencies are, it might be easier for you to then determine what they might say in a situation, or what plan of action or course of action they might pursue as a result of their characters' tendencies, their behavioral tendencies. So I think the archetypes are a good thing for you to look at and examine and think about when you're creating brand new stories, or when you're trying to take something that you feel like is maybe been said before, but say it in a new and different way. Think about the archetypes and then twist them up, turn them on their head. The book 45 Master Characters is precisely that kind of volume that's going to help you with that. So if you take a look at, I've got my copy right here. If you're, looking for a way to spice up your story and you feel like your characters might be either getting stale or they're not as interesting as you thought they might be in the context of the whole story, this is just like the master plots. You can go in through here and see all the different, you got archetypes in here, and then you've got subcategories from the archetypes, and then you've got combinations of character types, and you get this really interesting volume where it's taking an interesting look at different ways to manifest character. So I think this is a real helpful book to have around. It's not the kind of thing you need every day, but once in a while, if you're stuck, it's a great reference to have at hand. Okay, so in week 3B, we also tackled the concept of the beat sheet. And one of the key takeaways I wanted you to have from the beat sheet section was the idea that if we look at a TV show, for instance, but this goes for pretty much any dramatic structure, but let's say a TV show, we're talking about a half an hour show. That half an hour show is probably going to have 14 or 15 beats in that 28 to 30 minutes. Okay. As opposed to the 1 hour structure, which is going to have 28 to 30 beats. Okay, so if you're planning a half an hour TV episode and you do a beat sheet and you feel like your beat sheet is falling in around 15 beats, you're probably in the right ballpark in terms of an event that leads to another event that leads to another event, and the cause and effect draws you smoothly through your storyline. If you come up short with about 10 beats, then you may have failed to explore a story point thoroughly enough, or you don't have enough story to really flesh out that idea. You don't have enough content to fill the broadcast space, and so you're going to have to expand your story somewhere. Okay. I had you read from the writer's journey on mapping the journey. And then I gave you guys from writing the TV drama, I gave you a quick read on how a classic script is crafted. Okay, and that will run part and parcel with your Final Draft tutorials if you're using Final Draft, and certainly will work well in tandem with your Screenwriter's Bible volume that you have to help you format your scripts. I showed you guys a video by Jill Chamberlain about do beat sheets work, and Jill Chamberlain is the one who came up with that nutshell technique, which I didn't really touch on with you guys because I didn't want it to get confusing. The nutshell technique kind of works very similar to the beat sheet thing that we talked about, the Zack Snyder concept of beat sheets. So we have that in here as an examination of whether or not beat sheets can be helpful, and in what capacity do they serve your pre-production of your story. I gave you Dramatica, which is it's an analysis of the 7 major story structure paradigms, but I didn't go into it in detail because, again, I don't want to muddy the water here by giving you too many things to think about or too many avenues for reaching solutions. It's the kind of thing where if you take a look at Dramatica, you're going to see how a couple of the authors are breaking down story structure into 3 acts. Some are breaking it down into more. Some are breaking 3 acts into 6 stages of story. Some are breaking it down into 12. Some are breaking it down into more. And so the idea here is that you can use this as a reference. I'll see if I can access it for you really quick. Where did I put it? You can look up these different structures. Here we go. Here's Dramatica. You can look them up and compare them to the one you're working with currently. For instance, if you like Vogler's model and you like 3 acts with 6 stages of story development, but you want to come up with more situations or issues or problems for your character, like you want to have some repeating inciting incidents, for instance, that's going to require that you have more than 6 stages of story if you have a cyclical repeating inciting incident. So you might want to look at, Sid Field's a really simple explanation. Michael Hogue goes a little farther afield. McKee has an interesting take on it. Seeger's a very simple diagram, but it's going to show you in here what those different diagrams look like. So this is a pretty good document for you to just check out at your leisure. It won't be necessarily functional to your day-to-day writing unless you start feeling restricted by the structure that you're working with currently. Like if you just don't think that the 3-act 6-stage structure is working anymore and you need more nuance to the way you tell your stories, you might want to give this a read and see what your options are. It's quite long. I think it's it's 22 pages. So it's going to go by author here pretty quick. So Sid's analysis of 3-act structure is pretty simplified, as you can see. And he's talking about one inciting incident, a midpoint, and a climax happening in Act 3. Usually the climax is happening where he's got his second plot point, right? So this could very well be a half-an-hour TV episode story structure versus something a little bit more complex. McKee's even more simplified. And so is Linda. Here we go. Here's John Truby's 22 building blocks of story, right? Look at all the nuance in story twists or situations that Truby is suggesting you could put your characters through and still remain in a 3-act structure. So I think this is a good reference tool for you, but for that reason, because there's so many options in here, I didn't want to go too far out on a tangent and confuse the issue by giving you too many structures to think about. That's why I hover on Michael Hogue, Chris Vogler, and then Pete Russell, because those are the 3 simplest ones, Vogler being the most complex because he's using Campbell's hero's journey, which is a 12-stage structure, but he's kind of compressing it into 6 stages. So and I think that's a pretty simple and basic way to work. It's a good place to start, in other words. What else did we talk about? Writing subtext was the other real key point from this section of the semester. And it's kind of falling in line part and parcel with your dossiers in the notion that subtext or the backstory that you generate for a character can be very informative to how those characters behave in the scripted present tense, right? So if a character has a historical backstory that has wounded them in some way psychologically, wounded them physically, or created bias or opinions or behaviors in that character that manifest in the present tense of your story without having to go into a lot of detail in the current telling of your script, with a few clues revealed in dialogue and with a few demonstrated behaviors, you could allude to an entire subtext that a character might have, which might inform the audience or the writer themselves what the significance of that character is within that plot, within that story relationship. So subtext is really important. You don't necessarily reflect it in the dialogue, but I think it's helpful to know that it's there, because as the writer creating the character, you can then use that information to help you guide that character through whatever workings they're performing in the script. Okay, so beat sheets. We asked the very simple question: what is it? Okay, well, it's a list of emotional moments. It's almost a roadmap. It's going to keep you on the path of your plot, your story, by sort of helping you see I'm going to say the graphic illustration like you can get in the story structure book. It's going to help you see your narrative graphically using a set of bullet points. Okay, so you build up an individual story based on beats. They create reactions in the audience. And we're going to base our beat sheets on whatever classic structure we're using. It's a guide to characters' actions and behaviors. Each beat leads from one to the next. So on a beat sheet, the major beats in a scene are going to help move your story forward smoothly and have it make sense. If you're creating a beat sheet, for instance, and you have 7 beats in a scene, interior, I don't know, interior classroom, and you find out that some of the beats really don't take us anywhere. They just really describe action that might be supportive or reflective or reactive to something else that's happening. It could really be the same beat we're talking about, and it could be superfluous. And by really analyzing how many emotional beats are happening in your scene and which beats move that character through the story, you might be able to simplify your script or simplify your story by removing beats that don't lead anywhere. Okay. And then we're talking about this not so much as a rule, but as a guideline. So, some people have a good internal metronome where they have a sense of how to get a story to move forward without getting mired down in superfluous details. I think I gave some feedback about one script already that I've looked at that seemed like, and it might not be this class, but the action lines were really mired down in a lot of detail. And it really wasn't getting the scene anywhere. It was just a lot of superfluous detail that didn't really have anything to do with the character and didn't have anything to do with the story such that it was being told and moving forward. It was simply a lot of extra detail that adds to the page count of your script, and it also sort of dilutes your story for the reader. And it might be the kind of thing that would reveal itself on a beat sheet, and it'd be the kind of thing you could thin out or remove to keep your presentation interesting. It's really up to you how you want to make this work. Okay. I introduced you to the movie beat sheet from No Film School. So this is theirs. Has 12 beats, kind of like the hero's journey, but they're not exactly the same beats as the hero's journey. But it's still giving you a sense of how the story in terms of beats might move from beginning, middle to end. Okay. Okay. We looked at something called the appropriate goodbye, which was a document created by a couple of the writers over at Full Sail. and we looked at the beat sheet based on the text that I provided for you, the script. And I think everybody got the concept of this. I don't think there was anybody who was out in left field about beat sheets. So I don't think there's any reason to go back into this. All your assignments looked really good. The few things that I saw in the beat sheet assignments that I noted in the feedback were sometimes there were superfluous beats, or beats that didn't go anywhere, lead anywhere in terms of story. Sometimes there were two beats within a category that felt like the same moment to me, and I might have indicated that. But all in all, everything looked pretty good. The other kind of notion or rule of thumb that I gave you guys is that generally speaking, like this is a 3-act beat sheet and it's on one page. And if you take a look at the cross section, it's really, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 5 scenes total. And under each scene, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 beats. I think there's 9 here. Okay. And then there's 7 here. And then there's 1 in the opening image, right? So if your scene has less than 5 beats, you might not be recognizing all of the emotional points or the points that are moving your story forward, or maybe the scene is a little underdeveloped and you might need something else going on there. Not necessarily, okay? It doesn't mean that if you have 3 or 4 beats in a slug line on your beat sheet for your script, doesn't mean that scene is going to be boring, bad, or wrong. It's just a little alarm bell that you should think about and say, have I looked at this closely enough? Have I identified all of the major points that move the story forward or not? I gave you the example of
Professor Welch.
Yes.
Hi, sorry. I have a question, a really quick question.
Yeah.
If I have, for example, a scene that it's really, really short. For example, I have this moment of my story where they're in a car. So I don't know if that's superfluous on the beat sheet or if it's because the moment in the car, like the car scene is really short. So
who's in the car? What's happening in the car?
My main protagonist, Amanda, and her boyfriend. And what's happening is that we are noticing how their relationship is, which is she's always talking about things and bragging about the things that she has. And like we show that she's alone, kind of alone on their relationship. I have that scene just to understand that this is a very nonsense relationship.
That's an interesting scenario that you've painted, because that sounds to me like a dialogue driven but pivotal scene. What you have is you have 2 dysfunctional characters that are trying to, they're exploring whether or not their relationship is reparable or damaged permanently.
Sorry.
And then you have 2 points of view of that situation. One person who's maybe trying to mend and the other person who's trying to get away, or maybe they're both trying to mend, but they don't see eye to eye on what the real problem is.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, to me, that's more than a performance driven or an action driven scene.
Okay.
So I'm of the opinion that, and you guys can jump in on this, some of you who are doing think pieces or dialogue pieces. I think at that point you can get really granular with the beats in that scene, and you could say, okay, the scene starts and I don't know what's happening, so I'm just going to kind of make something up on the fly here.
It's fine.
These 2 individuals, we know who they are because it's not the first scene in the movie. It's maybe a third of the way or half of the way through. They have to go somewhere. It's one person's responsibility to show up to this gathering, and the other person is just going along because they want to make you know, they want it to look good socially to their friends
Yeah,
and family.
exactly.
So they're along for the ride, even though they really could care whether they go to this or not. Okay. So the person who's mending fences might say, you know, you could try to be a little bit more positive about this. It's all it is a dinner party. And the other person might say, you know, yes, but this is the kind of thing that I always have to do for you to make you feel better about me being a supportive partner in this relationship. And so there's two beats right there. There's somebody throwing out an accusation, and then somebody returning with an opinion that kind of raises the stakes in what's going to become an argument here pretty quickly. So those
Okay.
could be, you know, that could be one inciting incident with a reciprocating response that's going to lead to the next line of questioning, which is, well, why do you always feel like this relationship is work? And then the other person, you know, might ignore that question, fire up a cigarette, look out the window, right? That's a non-dialogue response to, I really don't want to talk about this, which then throws it back to the other person again, which is, there you go again. You're retreating into your, you know, into yourself, and you're not talking about this problem with me. And you'd rather sit there and smoke a cigarette and brood than hash this out. I'm fighting for our relationship here. Do you even care? And each time, each line of dialogue seems to be going further and further up this ladder, right? So
Yeah.
I could certainly see how you could treat that as bullet points in a beat sheet, because on the microcosmic level, just like in the story as a whole, and that scene is a microcosm of the whole story, really. It's
Okay.
two people in conflict. One person has one point of view of the relationship. The other person is less committed or less responsible. And it reflects itself in every situation you put these people in. So in your case, you have a very interesting scene there that really is a reflection of the whole story arc in one scene. And you can get a lot accomplished there with the dialogue if you're manufacturing it with this in mind, and by looking at how each accusation or each defensive response is a beat, and then see if there's an inciting statement, an accusation, and a response, or no response with dialogue but response with action. That's also a beat. Fires up the cigarette,
Okay.
rolls down the window. You know, you could do it that way, or you could treat it as, you know, maybe two beats. You know, if you're thinking about your story in terms of action, and it's not really a think piece, it could be as simple as you know, I don't know, you know, Jack and Jill decide to go to the party after all, instead of staying home and you know, having a quiet night at home. So they hop in the car. You know, Jill says, did you bring the party favors? And the next beat is you know, Jack says, got it. And then bang, you know, we're out of that scene, because really there's nothing more to demonstrate there.
Okay.
So I think it's going to depend on your approach.
Okay. Yeah, now I have a clear version of that. Sure.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any sort of or anything to add to that? Observations, maybe? No? Okay. I guess I'm glad that you got something there you can work with. So let's move on. Okay. This little graphic right here, I think I put it in week 4, was just something for you to think about in terms of who your protagonist is, how they go through their journey, maybe involving a little bit of subtext, which informs us on how they handle the situations that they are that they're going through, the stages of their journey. And each stage of the journey, they might have some kind of emotional or spiritual breakthrough that kind of leads them through their own character arc, just like actions and events lead us through a story arc. And so this one's illustrating, you know, your protagonist, and suggesting if they're a big-hearted communicator and they expend a lot of creative energy on remarkable plans and propositions that will help others to thrive and not just survive, armed with real-world experience, Okay. And it goes through each one of these stages to give you a sense of how to really start thinking about your character. Characters, I mean, these are our stock and trade. So the complexity of our characters, I think, only helps a situation of a story. And whether or not all that complexity finds its way onto the scripted page is not so much, it's not as important as if whether or not the complexity has helped us really create a compelling character by fully understanding their motives, fully understanding their wound, and then applying that information to the dialogue we give them and the actions we give them. I gave you a little bit of reading out of the McKee book. And Robert was talking about text means the sensory surface of a work of art. In film, it's the images. In music, it's the notes. And dialogue, or in scripts, it's the dialogue. In sound effects is part and parcel with the soundtrack. What we see, what we hear, what people say, what people do, all of that subtext contributes to all of that. And in a nutshell, it's the life under the surface, the thoughts and the feelings, known and unknown, hidden by or disguised by behaviors and by dialogue. So this chapter I gave you out of McKee really sort of underscores the whole discussion about subtext. We had a guest speaker in, what was it, week 6, I think. We had Betty come in and talk to the class. Did you guys find it helpful to hear from an industry professional? Did you have questions that didn't get addressed in that situation, or is there a situation where you found something helpful by that discussion? Because it's going to determine whether or not, you know, I bring more people in and what kinds of people I bring in to talk with you folks.
I really liked her coming in to speak. I think it was super helpful, and I think it was cool to hear her experience about being blacklisted in the industry and everything. I think that was just really informative and helpful.
Yeah. And she's got an interesting point of view, right? Because her career high point, or when she was at when she was really in her stride, I think was probably late 70s, early 80s for her TV scripted work, and then late 90s, early 2000s for her feature scripted work. And in each of those cases, the way she functioned in the film writing community, and how she was forced to interact with people, I think was different. And it's different again another 10 or 15 years later. I always felt it was helpful to hear from industry professionals who were involved with the things that I was concerned with, because it just kind of helped me temper my expectations a little bit. Sometimes it gave me things to think about that I had never considered before that moment. And other times it revealed details to me that were important, things that I should know that I had, you know, completely no awareness of. So I always liked meeting industry professionals and having access to them so I could ask questions. But, you know, it's you know, the question for you now is does it help, or does it hurt, or does it, you know, work one way or the other? So I've got one affirmative vote so far.
Yeah, I was about to say that I really liked it, and also when she said that you have to put yourself out there, that really struck to me, because it was like, yeah, you have to move around. You know, you can't sit there and wait for something to happen, or just send an email and that's it. No, like, you really need to make an effort to make your name known and all that stuff, and like getting network and going out there and asking people, calling people. And I really like that. That was like very inspiring to me.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. Did anybody have any questions that didn't get addressed? And if so, do you want me to forward those to Betty or not? That might be helpful to know. Did anybody leave that exchange with unanswered questions?
I think I forgot to ask a question, but I can email you about it after
Okay.
class.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll forward it to Betty, and then
Perfect.
her response may go directly back to you. I'll leave that up to her as how to handle that. But yes, if you have something that you want to get addressed, I'll be happy to forward it to her. Okay. So week 5, then we began our look and discussion at dialogue. What the role of dialogue is, how it works, how it can be expository, or how it can be informative to the audience or move the story along in some way, shape, or form. I had you read a little bit out of the book, How to Write, what is it? How to Write Amazing Dialogue? Where is it? How to Write, I lost my book on dialogue. Uh-oh. Anyway, you had a reading out of your dialogue novel. You also had some reading out of, what is it? The Bednarek PDF. The Bednarek PDF, I had 2 of them. I was going to have you guys read both of them. And then I realized one of them was just so packed full of academic speak that it was a distraction. And so I had you just read the one. I think it was the 31 page version, because I think it had some interesting things to say if you were able to distill out some of the academic lingo. Did anybody have any trouble with the Bednarek PDF to the point where it really wasn't helpful? What I've done is I went back through the document that I assigned to you folks, and I highlighted all the salient points in the document to sort of make the read a little bit more easy to digest. And so if anybody had a problem with the Bednarek document and you would like my highlighted version, I can send that to you through web courses. Just send me an email and let me know that you needed it. Okay. How about Barry Jenkins? Did you guys find anything from Barry Jenkins helpful in his discussion about how to write compelling dialogue? He's a novelist. He's not a screenwriter, so he's going to have a slightly different point of view on dialogue. I was just sort of curious whether or not you found it helpful or not, or whether you were indifferent to that video. Natalia, you found it helpful?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
I find it helpful. In fact, I watched one of his videos on how he self-edits, and that was really helpful for me, because that was one of my early stumbling blocks as an undergrad, was learning. First of all, it was coming to the realization that everything I write is not an amazing gem, and that some of it is a really unpolished stone that needs to be reworked and refashioned and improved along the way. And also, he really helped introduce me to the notion that everything I write is not ironic or significant. Sometimes we write things that are just sort of, they could be the solvent or the glue that holds significant moments together. And some of it can be really just sort of unnecessary, uncontributing drivel. And the self-editing process is really important to ferret out some of those problems with our early manuscripts. Self-editing could help some of you, and you know who you are because I've given out the feedback in your assignments about just about, for instance, your action lines or the cadence of your dialogue. And that's a really important self-editing process to develop is the proofreading, the powers of the proofread. Okay, reading something, especially if it's dialogue, reading it out loud to yourself or having somebody read it back to you out loud. You can really hear sometimes the problems in the way you've manufactured a phrase or a sentence or your word choice, right? And you can make those adjustments because it's now, especially if somebody else reads your dialogue back to you, excuse me, they're going to have a different way of seeing that dialogue when they read it back to you. So they might put emphasis on different parts of a piece of dialogue, or they might emphasize different words. And when they do, it changes up the cadence of what you've written from the point of view of your audience now. And sometimes that's helpful to hear. And I look for a thing I think I've talked to you guys before about, which is what I call mouthfeel. So if I recite dialogue to myself and I say it out loud, if I can read it and speak it conversationally with the same speed, accuracy, and with the same, with the proper inflection, then I know I have a good sense that I've nailed that piece of dialogue. And as long as it sounds believable in terms of the things that I'm saying, in terms of context, then I'm good with it. And I move on to the next thing and give it some time to marinate and maybe come back to it and read it out loud again to see if it, if I've really nailed it or not. But on the other hand, if I read something through and I can't even get through a line of dialogue because I'm stumbling over the words or the word arrangement, sometimes it's not necessarily one particular word, but a series of words that when they fall together on the same line, you just can't get them out of your mouth without messing something up. And that can be, if I understand that as the writer, then I understand that if I can't read through it and I know what point I'm trying to make in the first place, if I can't get through a line of my own dialogue without getting tongue-tied, then the actor's probably going to experience the same problem. And so that's a really strong indication to me that I've got to simplify the dialogue in a way that it rolls off the tongue easier and sounds convincing, and you can add some inflection to it, in terms of performance, and still have the dialogue roll out sounding believable. I think proofreading is super, super important, especially for dialogue. And in a way, so does LaHouche Egri. Now, LaHouche is talking about dialogue being the forward-facing or the chief means by which the very premise of our story is explained or revealed to the audience. He's placing an even heavier emphasis on the meaning of dialogue and the accuracy of dialogue. And if it's going to bear that much responsibility, then it certainly needs to be right. And it can't be disingenuous. It can't be too complex, but it also can't be oversimplified. And you should be careful about the quality of the dialogue, and then be mindful of whether or not you're writing any dialectics into your dialogue, like the way somebody speaks, a dialect or not, and then decide whether or not you want that dialect or accent to be reflected in the written text or merely implied, and then allow the actor who's performing that role to give life to that quality, to that accent. So like a Southern accent, for instance. Southern accent's going to have a certain kind of cadence, and it's going to have certain emphasis on different syllables in a word or a sentence. And there may be words that are contextualized phonetically to indicate that I'm speaking in a certain sort of a drawl, but you don't necessarily have to reflect that in your text. That's up to you. And then it becomes a mechanical matter of whether or not, if you put it into the actual dialogue text itself, does that create added confusion for the performer or not? In a lot of cases, what writers will do is they'll, in their initial introductions to a character, when we're saying, we see Stan for the first time, Stan is in capital letters, Stan is 26, his age is in parentheses. And then we learn a little bit about Stan as our initial introduction to him. A fascinating young man with a lot of curiosity and a lot of energy, from Mississippi, speaks in a heavy Southern drawl. That might be the only indication we need to give to the actor or the performer playing Stan, and then allow that person to sort of manipulate the dialogue in their own way, and add a little bit of their own perspective to how that character is going to sound. And don't give them too many parentheticals laced into the dialogue that are, supplying clues to how that performer should expedite that dialogue. Let them be sort of free to make some of those decisions and contribute creatively to the texture of that role. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you decide. I've seen some writers who will phonetically represent an accent or an ebonics or an accent or a local euphemism. They'll put those into the dialogue, and sometimes it works, and sometimes I think it just makes it harder to read. So you'll have to take your own cues on that and decide how to deal with that issue. I used the Breaking Bad example a lot. In the case of our Heisenberg here, I was talking about dialogue revealing character. Lashush Egri is big on dialogue as exposition, without telling us verbatim what's going on. The way somebody says something or the words they choose to use when they tell us something as the audience might be strong indicators of their motivation or their how they're feeling at that moment. And so dialogue plays a critical role. It's not just random words. And while we make it sound conversational, it should all be deliberate. There shouldn't be any piece of dialogue that doesn't contribute to your story. I'm the one who knocks, he said in that episode. We looked specifically at the episode Say My Name, and it was about manufacturing a moment for a character where we see a transitional change in their status or in their faith or in their standing in the story. In this case, what I was trying to illustrate to you was how they used dialogue, and then they used not novelty, but nostalgic references designed to elicit certain emotions, and use those visually in this scene along with the dialogue to show us the moment when our hero goes completely to the dark side. And so hopefully that was a helpful demonstration for you all to show you how, the writing plays a real critical role. And it's either describing action that a character does or telling us what a character says. And beyond that, we don't have much more input as the screenwriter to these situations. The rest of it is going to get sorted out visually. Maybe it's going to get sorted out in post-production with the addition of compelling soundtrack or special sound effects, special effects. But in this case, it was purely a moment that was described using dialogue and gave us the sense, without him coming out and saying, this is the part where I go to the dark side. It's revealed through his attitude and his dialogue that he is now going for broke. He's going to take control of the syndicate. He's going to push out the cartel from Mexico. He's going to become the major supplier in the entire Southwest of the United States, and they're going to accept it. They're going to take it from him, and they're going to submit. And so I think it created a very compelling scene, and hopefully you felt that tone throughout that piece. If not, I'll look for a better example for next time. I introduced you guys to the Dictionary of Imaginary Places very late in the semester. It's on your storybook shelf as a PDF. Helpful, but just as an afterthought. We looked at the difference between world building now, entering into week 6. We looked at the different ways that the same author, Peter Benchley, how he opened the novel Jaws, and then with the help of Carl Gottlieb, how he opened the screenplay of Jaws. And then to add insult to injury, we showed you the actual finished cut of the opening of the movie and saw further changes in the visual presentation that weren't in the screenplay or the novel. And that was just to give you a sense of it. It piggybacked on something that Betty said 2 weeks prior, which was when you're writing a screenplay with budget or logistics in mind, okay, you don't want to overwrite the story to where it is financially or technically impossible for the production to manufacture that scenario. And so we looked at the scenario in the novel, realized it was fat with a lot of extraneous detail about the beach house, and it was heavily laden with dialogue from characters that weren't going to play a significant role beyond the first scene, and that we could be more conscientious and more clever about our opening scene. So the screenplay eliminated the beach house interactions completely, and gave us more about what the two characters were thinking about when they were at the bonfire, and then as they're running across the beach. Are they going to make out? Are they going to go swimming? Are they going to do both? What's going on? Is he going to be able to perform at all because he's drunk? And we got a sense of what they were thinking through the screenplay. We also got, for the first time, we got something else. We got an interesting perspective, which is we got to read the point of view of the shark. And so that was pretty cool. Although something like that is very difficult to translate to the screen because we don't talk to sharks. Sharks don't speak English. So the only thing we can do is give the viewer a set of visuals that might substitute for, the shark's point of view. And we got that in the visual final version, which was the opening sequence under the title cards was all shark POV swimming through the kelp bed in the shallow waters off the beach at Amityville. Okay, so we did end up getting that in a way. We got it visually where we got it verbally in both the novel and the screenplay. And then in the finished visual version of Jaws, we got an even simpler rendition of the opening scene. We got a few random pieces of dialogue. Some of it was expository. Instead of knowing the mind of, I forget the character's name, was it Tom? He, instead of us learning from the author that Tom is drunk, but he's trying to act nonchalant and that he's not drunk. And then in the screenplay, in the action lines, we get something that indicates to us that Tom is drunk, but then he delivers a line that says, "I'm not drunk," right? Which is the psychological opposite of confirmation. He's saying he's not drunk, but by trying to defend himself as not being drunk, he reveals that he actually is drunk. So that's expository dialogue, right? And then Chrissy says, she says in a way, "Yeah, we'll fool around, but first I want to go swimming," and Tom says, "Where are we going?" And she says, "We're going to go swimming," right? So they're telling us what's happening. We think they're going to go make out. She's going to tell us she wants to go swimming first. And then she's going to dive into the water, and then it becomes action, action, action. So I like looking at stuff like this, especially if you've got three different versions or points of view, because it kind of shows you all the different ways of looking at the situation in sort of three dimensions. And I find this kind of, comparative research very informative. Now, maybe this works for you or not. But I think it's interesting because the whole point of a screenplay is to distill down the salient points of the novel, which may be 300, 400, 500 pages, into something like 80 to 215 pages of narrative screenplay, which has to be only the most important action, only the most important and demonstrable points, and only the most important dialogue that advances the story. So there's a lot that has to happen in the adaptation of IP like a novel, intellectual property like a novel, into a screenplay. Okay, and then so we talked about the idea that we have a lot of work to do in the first 10 pages of our script in terms of world building, because the ordinary world, which is phase one of the hero's journey from Campbell, or in Vogler's story structure, we have a lot to accomplish. We have to show the existing world. We have to show life in that existing world, introduce the protagonist, get to know something about them that will help us understand their motivations moving forward. We have to learn what their objective is. We have to maybe reveal what their wound is to the audience. We're also going to find out who the antagonist is, or one of the antagonists, and find out what their conflict represents with our protagonist. Then we have to have an inciting incident. We have to do all of this, hopefully within the first 8 to 10 pages of our screenplay. Why? Because contemporary audiences get very bored very quickly. And so in order to catch them and hook them with something that will keep them in their seats in the theater for the whole 2 hours, we have to set the situation up for them, so we don't leave them guessing too much in the beginning and getting lost in trying to understand what they're seeing, as opposed to processing and enjoying what they're seeing, by giving them enough information that they can enjoy the story instead of have to do too much thinking. So I left you guys with this little quote at the end of week 6, which is Paul Oster talking about world building and the importance of world building. And he said, when a person is lucky enough to live inside a story, to live inside an imaginary world, the pains of this world disappear. For as long as the story goes on, reality no longer exists. And what that is a very eloquent way of explaining the suspension of disbelief, which is one of the fundamental tenets of entertainment filmmaking, which is to transport our audiences to other worlds, other places that allow them for 2 hours to forget about reality and to get a break from their day-to-day grind, their day-to-day problems, whatever it is that, it's escapist creativity, it's escapist art, is what we're doing. And the suspension of disbelief is a strong concept within that tenet that says, if our story can transport our audience such that they forget that they're watching a movie, or they forget that they're reading a book, and they're so engrossed in the story that they've been transported, then we have fulfilled our role as storytellers to the optimum degree, in that we have suspended their disbelief. And that's a visual tenet as well. If we can create images that the audience will believe as true, then we can transport them for 2 hours and we can entertain them effectively. So it's all part and parcel of the same notion that our stories, whether visual or spoken dialogue or written text, it's all there to provide the audience with some relief, some escape, or to educate, but education, as we sometimes know by going to college, is not always entertaining. It can sometimes feel like work. So I exclude like documentaries from that from that discussion for that reason. Okay, so that's pretty much what I had to say. So your homework obviously is going to be now to just study for your midterm quiz, which is next week. And it opens on Monday, and it will close. Is it open on Monday or Tuesday? Let me just verify that for you really quick.
Also, Professor, on web courses, you have the 6 to 8 pages due this Sunday. That's correct, right?
Let's verify all of that right now to make sure. So I've got your midterm starting on the 5th. It's the 5th Monday or Tuesday? The 5th is what? No. March 2021. Oh, that's when the exam is due. So I've opened it on the 1st. So it'll open on the 1st. Yes, available from March 1st at 12 a.m. Closes on Friday, March 5th at 11:59 p.m. Your assignment, your script, that's back here, 6 to 8 page script, due February 28th at 11:59 p.m. That's like in a couple days. So your quiz is due a week after that. Is anybody going to run into a serious issue with that deadline? If you are, reach out to me through web courses and we can talk about your situation. But I felt like I gave you enough time because I gave you this assignment in week 6 and we are at the end now of week 7. So it's been 2 weeks already.
I do have a question. So for the last assignment I already turned in like a 6-page scene.
Mm-hmm.
So just so I won't turn in the exact same 6 pages, just write another scene, which is probably going to bring it to like 15.
So you wrote 6 pages for the 2 to 3 page assignment?
Yes, sir.
You're overworking. Yeah, because I mean, there's hopefully, maybe not, but hopefully, more, coming into this final, this midterm assignment than you did when you were doing your 2 to 3 page document, hopefully. Maybe it's the same thing for you, but what you can do for me is, build on what you already sent in then. If you wrote 6 pages already, was that a complete scene or was it a part of a scene? I'm trying to remember what yours was.
It was a complete scene.
It was just a quick scene, right?
Yeah, it was when they were like on top of the roof looking at the stars, talking with each other.
Right. Okay. So what's the next scene? Write the next scene.
Yes, sir.
Because, hey, let's make these assignments work for us instead of working too hard. So if you're going to give me that was an episode for a series, right?
Yes, sir.
So what are you going to give me as your second writing project at the end of the semester? The whole episode?
Yes, sir.
Like 23 pages?
Well, my episode, I'm like it's an hour-long series, so it originally been like 45, but you told it turn in like 30.
Yeah, at the most.
Yeah. So you're going to get like half, like 2/3 of the episode.
Give me 6 more. Give me the next 6 pages after the scene you've turned in. And because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're writing that longer script a little bit at a time. With each assignment, you're writing a little bit more towards your bigger final project. I don't have a problem with that. Somebody asked me if they could just turn in the same scene that they wrote for me before, just revised. And well, that would demonstrate a difference in the two documents, the revision itself. It's not new work per se, that I don't really consider it new work. So give me another scene, the one right after, the one right before, give me another 6 pages. The midterm project is 6 to 8 pages. So if you want to give me another 6, some people gave me like half of a scene, or they gave me a condensed version of what felt like a condensed version of a scene. If you want to give me the whole deal then as your midterm project. So let's say the whole scene was actually 12 pages, but you only gave me 4 pages as your dialogue assignment, and now you want to give me the whole 12 as your midterm assignment. That's okay, because you're giving me 8 fresh pages. If you gave me 4 already, you're giving me 8 more. So even though it's the same scene, it's 8 more pages within the context of that scene, and I'll accept that as new work. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. I mean, I want to make this as easy as possible. I don't want this to be a problem. So if you have any more questions about that, you can reach out to me. Hopefully I'm responding to your web course emails on a more timely basis than I describe in the syllabus. So I'm trying to respond right away when I see people send me messages, especially when I've got a big assignment due. So if something comes up, just shoot me an email and we'll try to solve the problem. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, let's get back to my presentation, because I think I hit the end here. Where are we? Yeah. So study. And you're going to have 30 questions. You'll get 60 minutes to do it. It will be timed. So is there anybody who is already extremely worried about being able to answer 30 multiple choice questions in an hour? I'll take that as a no. And I kind of felt that way about this group. I mean, you guys, some of you are already well on your way to becoming good writers. And so I think these concepts are really kind of remedial for you. And it's not the kind of thing where you have to look up specific data or information anyway. The reason I time my tests is because in my technical classes, I have students trying to look up the actual factual answers to mathematical problems or things of that nature. And the timed exam is manufactured in the way that you can't look up the answers to all the questions and finish the test on time. So it's there to de-incentivize the open book, loose interpretation of, taking a test for some of those types of test takers. But with you guys, I think you either get it at this point or you don't, and then you might as well wing it and just guess, which takes all of about 3 seconds. You only got 4 possible answers and one of them's right. So you got a 25% chance of being right without knowing anything at all. So that's it. So does anybody have any questions or any feedback or any concerns or anything you want to cover at this point? No? Sweet. If that's the case, then all that's left, I think, is to, wish you all good luck. And, the quiz won't open until Monday anyway. So you'll be working on your scripts this weekend. Shoot me an email if you run into some issues. And then take your time, study for the test and take it at any point you want during the week.
I do have a question about the format of the test. Just a basic question. Is this the type of, do you have your tests set up to where we can't go back to previous questions, or are we able to move between different questions?
You should be able to, let's look at that really quick and make sure, but it should be set up so that you can.
Yeah, because there are some professors who set it up to where like you have to answer that question in that order, and if you don't answer it, like you can't come back to it.
Yeah, I think I did it. the way you're talking about, which is, hey now, that's weird. Where's the rest of my,
Wait, where we would have to answer it in order?
no.
Okay, where we can
Other-
check. Okay,
Yes. I just lost my, whoops. Cannot minimize. Oh, there it is. Let's look at it. Let's look. So 60 minutes, the answers are not shuffled. You can view your responses. Yeah, so you can view your responses. So yes, you can go back and answer a question if you left it, for instance, till the end. Something that
I think that viewing your responses just means that after you submit the exam, you can go back and see what your answers are. I don't think that necessarily means that we can go back and
no, because I set that different. I set that separately, and I set the answers to be revealed, I think, the following day,
Gotcha.
something like that. So I set those two things separately. I know what you're talking about, and I set both of those individually. But you should be able to go back and revisit a question if you had to leave it for the sake of time.
okay.
Anybody else? And it's multiple choice. So, and I don't manufacture questions in such a way that if you answer one wrong, that you're going to get the next three wrong also. I don't do things like that. I just want to know that you understand these concepts, and I'm going to ask you some pretty straightforward, simple questions, and then you'll have one of four possible choices to select. Okay. I'm not really interested in tripping you guys up. I just want to make sure that you've been paying attention, you've been doing the work, and that there's no issues of, misunderstanding. And that's it. So I anticipate a lot of high grades, in other words. Anybody else? I see clapping. Okay, cool. Then should we go ahead and adjourn for the day, and then I'll leave you guys to get on with it. All right, I got a first and second, third and fourth motion on that. All right. All right, folks, thanks very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Good luck on your test, and I look forward to your scripts this weekend. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.